They laughed when I lost everything. They didn't laugh when I bought it back. After losing my job, marriage, and home, my family mocked me. Years later, I returned quietly, not for revenge, but dignity, and the power shift was undeniable. They were laughing at the table when I realized I no longer had a place to sit. I stood just outside the dining room, my hands still wrapped around the doorframe, listening to the sound of forks clinking against porcelain, my sister's sharp laugh cutting through the air like a snapped wire. The house smelled the same as it always had. Overcooked meat, lemon cleaner, something faintly sweet, but I felt like a stranger hovering in someone else's memory. No one had noticed me yet, or maybe they had, and this was their way of pretending I wasn't there. That moment comes back to me often, not because of what they said, though I remember every word, but because of what I felt. That quiet, sinking understanding that I had fallen so far, even blood didn't recognize me anymore. Before everything unraveled, my life was unremarkable in the best way, predictable, warm. I had a job I didn't love but trusted, a marriage that felt like a shared rhythm, and a small house with a cracked porch step I always meant to fix. Mornings started with burnt toast and the low hum of the coffee maker. Evenings ended with tired smiles and shoes kicked off by the door. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. I worked as a project manager for a regional construction firm. Steady hours, modest pay, decent benefits. My wife Laura taught at a local elementary school. She had this habit of humming while she graded papers, a sound that used to drift through the house like background music. We didn't have children, something that bothered my mother more than it ever bothered us. Family dinners were polite but loaded, every question a gentle probe. Any news? Any plans? My family has always believed success was something you displayed, not lived. My older sister married well and never let anyone forget it. My younger brother bounced between ideas, but somehow always landed on his feet, helped along by my parents' quiet support. I was the middle child, the reliable one, the one who didn't ask for much, the one who, they assumed, would always be fine. Until I wasn't. The first crack appeared at work, though I didn't recognize it then. Meetings I used to lead were reassigned. Emails stopped including me. When I asked my supervisor about it, he gave me a tight smile and said things were shifting. I went home that night with a knot in my chest, but I didn't tell Laura. I didn't want to worry her over something that might pass. It didn't. 2 weeks later, I was called into a conference room with glass walls and offered a severance packet printed on cheap paper, budget cuts, restructuring, words that sound clean until they're applied to your life. I remember nodding, shaking hands, carrying a cardboard box to my car like I was in a movie I didn't audition for. Laura tried to be supportive at first. She made lists, suggested optimism, talked about new beginnings, but stress changes people in small, almost invisible ways. Our conversation shortened. Her humming stopped. She stayed later at work. I stayed longer in silence. When we told my family about the job, my mother's lips tightened. My sister offered advice that felt more like judgment. "Maybe you got too comfortable," she said, sipping her wine. My father asked how long we could float before things got serious. No one asked how I was sleeping. The house followed soon after, missed payments stacked like unopened mail. We argued in whispers at night, then louder ones during the day. One evening, Laura told me she needed space. Another evening, she told me she'd already found it at a friend's place. She left a note on the counter and took her books, her clothes, her quiet disappointment. By the time the foreclosure notice arrived, my family had already decided who I was becoming. The jokes started softly, comments about couches I could crash on, suggestions I start over somewhere cheaper. On Sunday dinners, they spoke about me like I wasn't in the room, or worse, like I was a lesson. I told myself it was temporary, that dignity could survive a season of loss, that I would rebuild quietly, without bitterness. But sitting outside that dining room, listening to their laughter rise and fall, I understood something new. Loss doesn't just take things from you. Sometimes it shows you exactly how much you were worth to begin with.
I wish I could say the laughter was what broke me, but it wasn't. It was what came after. What followed was quieter, politer, more damaging. After that dinner, the invitations stopped coming altogether. No Sunday check-ins, no casual texts. When I reached out, replies came late and thin, like they'd been filtered through obligation first. I told myself it made sense. Everyone had their own lives. I was the one who had fallen off the map. I found a small basement studio on the edge of town. It smelled faintly of damp concrete and old paint, but it was cheap and the landlord didn't ask questions. My mattress lay directly on the floor. At night, I listened to pipes knock behind the walls like distant footsteps. During the day, I applied for jobs that never responded. What unsettled me wasn't the struggle itself. I expected that. It was the way my family began managing me. Conversations turned strategic. My mother asked whether I'd considered selling what little I had left. My sister suggested I sign over my car to avoid losing it the hard way. My brother offered to hold on to some documents for safekeeping. They spoke slowly, gently, the way you talk to someone you believe is already defeated. The first real clue came from my father, unintentionally. We met for coffee one afternoon, his idea. He stirred his drink longer than necessary, eyes fixed on the surface like he was reading something there. "You know," he said, "your mother's been worried about liabilities." I frowned. "Liabilities?" "In case things get complicated," he said, "legally." That word lingered between us, legally. I asked him what he meant, but he waved it off, said it was just parental concern. Still, something about his tone, careful, rehearsed, followed me all the way back to my apartment. A week later, I received a letter from a law office I didn't recognize. It was brief, formal, and addressed to me with unsettling precision. It informed me that certain assets connected to my former residence were under review due to family mediation proceedings. Family mediation. I called the number immediately. The receptionist sounded bored as she told me she couldn't discuss details without authorization. When I pressed, she suggested I speak to my appointed representative. I didn't have one. That night, I drove to my parents' house unannounced. The porch light was on, but no one answered at first. I could hear voices inside, television murmuring, dishes clinking. When my mother finally opened the door, surprise flashed across her face. Then something else, calculation. "We weren't expecting you," she said. "I got a letter," I replied, holding it up. "What's going on?" She glanced at it briefly and sighed. "Come in." We sat in the living room, the same room where childhood photos still lined the shelves. My sister arrived halfway through the conversation, her expression unreadable. My brother hovered near the doorway, arms crossed. They explained it in pieces, carefully, as if easing me into cold water, because I had defaulted on payments, because my credit was unstable, because Laura was gone, and there were no dependents. They had consulted a lawyer for my protection, they insisted, to ensure that no future debts or complications could affect the family. "What assets?" I asked, my voice tight. My sister answered before anyone else could. "The house, originally, before foreclosure, and now other things." "Like what?" She hesitated, just long enough. "Any future claims," she said. "Inheritance, insurance, anything that could be contested if you, well, didn't recover." The room felt suddenly smaller. My ears rang. "You were planning this while I was still married?" I asked. My mother reached for my hand, then stopped herself. "We were planning around the situation." I stood up slowly. No one tried to stop me. As I drove away, my hands shook so badly I had to pull over. It wasn't just that they doubted me, it was that they had already decided the outcome. They weren't waiting to see if I'd rebuild. They were preparing for my disappearance. In the weeks that followed, more pieces fell into place. Paperwork redirected, phone calls not returned, a quiet reshuffling of what I thought was shared history. I realized then that losing my job and marriage hadn't been the real betrayal. That had only made the real one possible. And for the first time since everything collapsed, something hardened inside me. Not anger, not revenge, clarity.
Clarity doesn't arrive loudly. It settles in like dust after something shatters. I stopped calling them, not out of spite, out of self-preservation. Every conversation left me feeling smaller, like I was negotiating my own worth in rooms where the price had already been set. Instead, I focused on surviving, quietly, methodically. I took temporary work wherever I could find it. Night shifts at a warehouse, contract coordination for a startup that didn't bother learning my last name.
I learned how to stretch a meal, how to sleep through noise, how to keep my dignity folded neatly inside my jacket like a letter I wasn't ready to open. One evening, while organizing old files on a borrowed laptop, I found something I hadn't seen in years, a digital copy of a proposal I'd written back when I was still at the construction firm, a cost-saving model for small-scale urban redevelopment. It had been shelved, ignored, then forgotten. I read it slowly, line by line, not with nostalgia, but with distance. It was solid, better than solid. It was practical, scalable, and still relevant. I started researching quietly, updating numbers, adjusting assumptions. After my warehouse shifts, I sat at a folding table in my studio apartment, the glow of the screen reflecting off bare walls, the sound of pipes ticking like a metronome. I didn't tell anyone, not friends, not family, especially not family. Months passed, then a year. I partnered with a former colleague who had left the firm before I did, someone who remembered my work, not my downfall. We didn't dream big. We aimed small and stable. One project, then another, then three. The money didn't come fast, but it came clean. During that time, my divorce finalized quietly. Laura sent a short email wishing me well. I wished her the same. There was no closure moment, no dramatic exchange, just two people releasing something that no longer fit. My family resurfaced occasionally, like distant signals, a birthday text, a forwarded article about starting over after failure. I responded politely, briefly. I had learned the cost of over-explaining. Then came the call that shifted everything. It was from a real estate broker I didn't know. She spoke crisply, professionally, asked if I was still associated with a property on Cedar Lane. My stomach tightened. I used to live there. She paused. There's interest from a private buyer. We were told you might still have historical insight. Historical insight. After we hung up, I sat very still. Cedar Lane was my parents' street. The same house, the same dining room, the same table where they had laughed while I stood unseen. I did some digging, quietly. The house was no longer in my parents' name. It had been transferred, sold below market value, into a family trust managed by my sister's husband. The timing was surgical. Right after my foreclosure, right after the legal conversations I was never meant to hear. I felt something then, not rage, not satisfaction, but a calm resolve, a sense that a circle was closing, not by force, but by patience. I contacted the broker again, asked for details, made an offer through a holding company we'd recently formed for development acquisitions. Clean, anonymous, cash-backed. When the paperwork came through, I read every line twice. No one knew it was me. The day I signed, I didn't celebrate. I went back to my apartment and cooked a simple meal. Rice, vegetables. I ate slowly, listening to the hum of the fridge, feeling the weight of the pen still in my hand. Weeks later, my mother called. Her voice was strained. "Have you heard anything about the house?" I let the silence stretch just long enough. "What about it?" "It's being transferred again," she said. "The new owner wants to renovate. We've been asked to vacate." I closed my eyes. "Oh," I said, "that's difficult." She waited for more. Advice, sympathy, rescue. I gave her none. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I had already walked through every room again, not as a son, not as a failure, but as the quiet man holding the keys. I returned to the house on Cedar Lane on a gray Tuesday morning, the kind that smells like rain even when it doesn't fall. The broker met me at the door. She was efficient, polite, unaware of the history pressing against the walls. I thanked her, signed the final access form, and waited until her car disappeared down the street before I stepped inside alone. The air was stale, familiar. The same hallway runner lay crooked near the stairs. The clock above the coat rack still ticked too loudly, just as it always had. Time hadn't moved here. It had only waited. I walked through each room slowly, not to claim them, but to release them. The dining room table stood exactly where it used to. I ran my fingers along its edge, remembering the laughter, the clink of glasses, the way I had hovered unseen. That version of me felt distant now, not healed, just no longer bleeding. Renovations began the following week. I didn't rush them. I wasn't trying to erase the past, only to reshape what came next. Walls were repainted, floors refinished, light let in where shadows had settled too long. The notice went out formally. The family trust was dissolved, occupancy terminated. Legal language, clean and impersonal. My sister called first. Her voice was sharp. "Do you know who bought the house?" "No," I said honestly. "Why?" She exhaled hard. "They won't negotiate. They won't even meet." "Maybe they don't need to," I replied. She hung up without saying goodbye. My parents moved into a rental nearby, smaller, quieter. My brother blamed the market. My mother blamed stress. My father said very little at all. None of them reached out again until the day they received the invitation. It wasn't dramatic, no grand reveal, just a simple card, cream-colored, my name printed neatly at the bottom. "You're invited to a small gathering at Cedar Lane." No explanation, no signature flourish. They came out of curiosity more than expectation. I watched from the kitchen as they stepped inside, their faces registering confusion, then disbelief, then something close to fear. My sister's eyes darted from wall to wall. My mother touched the banister like it might vanish. I entered the room quietly. They turned. No one spoke at first. My father was the first to find his voice. "What is this?" "This," I said evenly, "is my house." My sister laughed once, a short, hollow sound. "That's not funny." I didn't say it to be funny. I explained only what was necessary. No accusations, no history lesson, just facts. I had rebuilt. I had invested. I had purchased the property legally and cleanly. Their names were no longer attached to it. My mother's eyes filled. "Why didn't you tell us?" I considered that, truly. "Because you never asked how I was rebuilding, only how long I'd last." Silence settled thickly. No one argued, no one apologized. They didn't need to. The power had already shifted, not through cruelty, but through clarity. I didn't do this to punish you. I did it to take back what I lost. Not the house, myself. I offered them time to collect their remaining things, fair terms, dignity, the very thing I hadn't been afforded. As they left, my sister paused at the door. "You think you've won," she said quietly. I met her gaze. "No," I replied. "I think I'm done." That night, I sat alone in the living room, the windows open, the house breathing differently now. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt settled. Some victories don't look like celebrations. They look like peace. After they left, the house was quieter than I expected. Not empty, just still. The kind of stillness that doesn't echo, that doesn't accuse. I walked from room to room as the light shifted, dusk settling gently against the walls. Somewhere outside, a neighbor's dog barked once, then stopped. Life continued, uninterested in our private reckoning. I slept there that night for the first time. On a mattress on the floor again, some habits linger, but this time the floor was warm beneath me, the ceiling familiar without feeling heavy. I lay awake, listening to the house breathe, the old ticking clock finally removed, replaced by silence. I thought I might feel vindicated, or hollow, or sad. Instead, I felt intact. In the weeks that followed, I didn't hear much from my family. A few messages came through, carefully worded, uncertain. My mother sent a photo of a plant she was trying to keep alive in the rental. My father asked if I'd received some paperwork correctly. Logistics, no emotional reach, no confrontation. And that was fine. I realized then that closure doesn't always arrive as an apology. Sometimes it comes as acceptance of who people are and who they are not willing to be. I focused on the work. The projects grew, slowly, sustainably. I hired a small team. We took on developments that mattered, renovations that preserved neighborhoods instead of erasing them. There was pride in that, a quiet kind. One afternoon, as I stood on a job site watching sunlight spill through a newly framed window, I caught myself smiling, not because of success, but because I wasn't afraid of losing it anymore. I ran into Laura once, by chance, at a grocery store. We stood by the produce, exchanging polite updates. She looked well, so did I. There was no ache in the conversation, just gratitude for what had been, and relief for what wasn't. That surprised me most of all. I kept the house on Cedar Lane, but I didn't keep it the same. I changed it, not to erase memory, but to make room. I hosted friends there. Laughter returned, softer than before, kinder. I planted something new in the backyard, watched it grow. My family never asked to come back, and I never invited them again. Not out of punishment, out of understanding. I learned something through all of this, something no one ever teaches you when they talk about failure. Losing everything doesn't define you, but how people treat you when you have nothing, that tells you exactly who they are. They laughed when I lost everything. They didn't laugh when I bought it back. But by then, their laughter or silence no longer mattered, because the real victory wasn't the house or the business or the shift in power. It was dignity. It was learning to stand quietly in my own life and know that I belonged there, without permission, without validation, without fear. Some people wait their whole lives for revenge. I waited for peace, and when it came, it stayed. If you were in my place, would you have done the same? Let me know in the comments, and if this story moved you, consider subscribing or supporting the channel. There are more quiet truths like this still waiting to be told.